Berkeley, California, September 2nd, 1930. The air smelled of hot metal and ozone. Inside a cramped basement laboratory, a man in a wrinkled lab coat leaned over a machine that looked more like a sculpture than science. A tangle of copper wires, magnets, and hope. His name was Ernest Orlando Lawrence, a 29-year-old physicist from South Dakota, and that afternoon he was about to change the future of science. Lawrence was not a man of spectacle. He spoke softly, worked relentlessly, and believed that any problem, no matter how complex, could be solved by human ingenuity and patience. In his hands, physics wasn't theory, it was craft. He wasn't building equations, he was building machines that could make equations real. That basement, humming with electricity, was the birthplace of modern nuclear physics. He had arrived at the University of California, Berkeley, only 2 years earlier. The Great Depression had darkened the country, funding was scarce, and science was a luxury most universities could barely afford. Yet Lawrence, armed with nothing but confidence and a second-hand idea, proposed something radical, a device that could accelerate particles using a magnetic field. A miniature lightning storm trapped inside a metal disc. He called it a cyclotron. The idea was simple in theory, impossible in practice. He had seen a brief note in a German physics journal describing circular particle motion in magnetic fields. Most scientists dismissed it as impractical. Lawrence saw potential. He scavenged old parts, magnets from broken machines, and glass from laboratory trash. Working with a few students, he built the first prototype, a palm-sized device capable of accelerating protons to previously unreachable speeds. When the first test succeeded, a thin beam of charged particles struck its target, releasing a faint flash. To any passerby, it looked trivial. To Lawrence, it was the future of energy and matter. "We can make the atoms speak," he told his assistant that night. But the world didn't listen. American science was still young, conservative, and skeptical of big machines. Theoretical physicists looked down on engineers who tinkered with hardware. Lawrence was both, a builder and a dreamer. He began to blur the lines between the two, ushering in a new kind of science, big science. He didn't want small discoveries, he wanted revolutions. His early cyclotron could accelerate ions to 80,000 volts, a record. But Lawrence wasn't satisfied. He wanted more power, bigger magnets, faster particles. He lobbied for funds, begged local industries for scrap metal, and wrote to government agencies no one had ever asked for scientific aid. His persistence paid off. In 1931, he secured $1,000, barely enough to build the next version. It didn't matter, he stayed in the lab day and night, adjusting coils, measuring voltages, pushing the limits of what the fragile equipment could handle. Soon, the energy doubled, then tripled. Within a few years, his cyclotron could accelerate particles to 1,000,000 volts. The results stunned the scientific world. Nuclear reactions, previously thought impossible to study outside massive laboratories, could now be observed on a tabletop. Lawrence's invention had turned atomic research from theory into engineering. By 1935, his laboratory at Berkeley had become a magnet for young physicists from around the world. The hum of machines filled the corridors. Visitors described it as a mix between a factory and a cathedral. Sparks flew, glass cracked, and copper coils glowed under strain. And yet, through the chaos, Lawrence moved calmly, clipboard in hand, eyes fixed on progress. He believed science wasn't about answers, it was about control, over nature, over uncertainty, over fear. He began collaborating with chemists and biologists, using the cyclotron to create new isotopes, artificial elements with strange, unseen properties. Some of them showed potential for medical use. Others revealed hints of the immense power hidden inside the atom. "We're touching the fabric of the universe," he said once, half in awe, half in warning. In 1939, at just 38 years old, Ernest Lawrence became the youngest American ever to win the Nobel Prize in Physics. The citation was short, for the invention of the cyclotron. The photograph taken that day shows him smiling faintly, standing beside his machine. A symbol of progress, hope, and the future. But the world around him was changing faster than science itself. Europe was burning, armies were marching, and the same atomic forces that fascinated him would soon be weaponized by nations desperate for power. His cyclotron, born from curiosity, would soon become a weapon of war. Lawrence didn't know it yet, but the machine he had built to understand life's smallest mysteries would soon define humanity's greatest fear. Question: could Ernest Lawrence's genius, the pursuit of pure knowledge, survive the moment the world turned his discovery into destruction? By the early 1930s, the basement laboratory at Berkeley was no longer a secret. Word of the strange circular machine began spreading through academic circles. Some scientists were curious, others skeptical. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ernest Lawrence was building something no one had ever attempted. A device that could unlock the hidden structure of the atom. Inside the radiation laboratory, the cyclotron hummed like a living creature. Coils vibrated, magnets throbbed, and glass tubes glowed a faint blue. The air smelled of oil, overheated metal, and ambition. People didn't come here to observe, they came to build. Lawrence pushed them hard, but never unfairly. His philosophy was simple. If the machine works, everything else will follow. As the cyclotrons grew larger, the entire university changed around him. Walls were knocked down, new rooms were built, and cables ran like veins through the hallways. The campus janitors joked that the machines were becoming too big for the buildings. They were right. The second cyclotron, nearly a metre across, required a dedicated room. The next would be the size of a small car, then a truck. Every time people told Lawrence that a bigger machine was impossible, he simply redesigned the room, or built a new one. He believed that scientific limits were nothing more than engineering puzzles waiting to be solved. Lawrence had another gift. He could inspire loyalty. Young physicists came to Berkeley from across the country because they sensed something important was happening there. In a world shaken by the Great Depression, Berkeley was one of the few places where imagination still felt powerful. Students slept in their offices, ate cheap cafeteria meals, and spent nights tightening screws or repairing broken circuits. They worked with a sense of urgency, as if knowledge itself were racing against time. Lawrence walked the lab floors constantly, checking readings, offering advice, correcting mistakes, and pushing everyone toward a single goal: mastery over the atom. Soon the cyclotron wasn't just a physics machine. It became a tool for chemistry, biology, and medicine. Bombarding elements with high-energy particles produced new isotopes, some of which had never existed on Earth. Medical researchers started using these isotopes to trace metabolic processes, allowing doctors to see inside the human body in ways once thought impossible. A machine built from scrap metal was transforming medicine. At the same time, Lawrence's ambitions grew. He imagined cyclotrons powerful enough to create artificial radio elements on an industrial scale, to probe the nucleus with unprecedented precision, and perhaps to access immense forms of energy locked inside matter. These ideas caught the attention of the US government. Washington wanted technologies that could provide military, industrial, and medical advantages. Lawrence provided results, and the funding followed. By 1936, the Berkeley Rad Lab became the largest nuclear research facility in the world. Engineers, technicians, metallurgists, and machinists filled the building like a miniature factory of science. But Lawrence's approach had a cost. Bigger machines meant higher risks. Radiation levels rose, equipment overheated, shielding failed. There were accidents, nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare some researchers. Lawrence rarely showed fear. He believed risk was the price of discovery. "If we hesitate," he said once, "someone else will move ahead." His confidence was contagious, but it also blurred the line between innovation and obsession. Then came 1939. As war spread across Europe, physics changed forever. Scientists fleeing Nazi Germany brought disturbing news. Nuclear fission had been discovered. the atom could be split, and with it, unimaginable power could be released. Lawrence immediately understood the implications. The cyclotron, once a scientific instrument, was now a strategic asset. Governments no longer cared about academic prestige. They cared about energy, destructive energy. The US military began asking questions. Could the cyclotron help separate uranium isotopes? Could it clarify how nuclear reactions unfolded? Could it provide the data needed to understand chain reactions? Lawrence answered yes to each one, not because he wanted a bomb, but because he believed that if this knowledge existed, America needed to understand it first. History was accelerating faster than any particle in his machines, and Lawrence was being pulled toward a future he could no longer control. The radiation laboratory had become a bridge between science and war, and Ernest Lawrence was standing in the middle of it. Question: as global tension increased, was Lawrence guiding the future of science? Or was the future pulling him into a world he never intended to enter? In 1941, the sound inside the Berkeley radiation laboratory changed. The hum of scientific curiosity was replaced by the clipped rhythm of urgency. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered the war, and physics, once a world of chalkboards and quiet debates, became a battlefield. Ernest Lawrence, with his cyclotrons and his relentless drive, was suddenly at the center of the most secret project in American history, the Manhattan Project. He was not a military man, nor a politician, yet the US government needed him in a way no one had predicted. Nuclear fission had revealed a terrifying truth. If the atom could be split in a controlled way, it might produce a weapon of unimaginable force. The question was how to extract the right material to make that weapon possible. Uranium existed in multiple forms, but only U-235 could sustain a chain reaction. Separating that rare isotope was nearly impossible. Nearly. Lawrence's cyclotron had inspired a new approach, the Cyclotron, a machine designed to separate uranium isotopes using massive electromagnetic fields. It was engineering on a scale the world had never attempted. General Leslie Groves, the project's military commander, needed someone bold enough to say yes to the impossible. That someone was Lawrence. He sent teams of Berkeley scientists and engineers to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where acres of land were turned into a secret industrial city. Hundreds of young technicians, many of them women with no scientific background, stood at control panels, adjusting dials with precision taught in a matter of weeks. The Cyclotrons roared day and night, drawing so much electricity that nearby towns experienced blackouts. The effort consumed more power than the entire city of New York. Lawrence split his life between Berkeley and Oak Ridge. In California, he pushed the development of new cyclotron designs. In Tennessee, he inspected machines the size of houses. He believed the work had to continue at any cost, not because he wanted a bomb, but because he feared what would happen if America fell behind. Nazi Germany had brilliant physicists. If they were the first to build a nuclear weapon, the consequences were unthinkable. The secrecy was absolute. Even Lawrence's closest friends were kept in the dark. Scientists communicated in code, newspapers were censored, and entire communities lived behind barbed wire without knowing the purpose of their own labour. The Manhattan Project was not just a scientific endeavour. It was a mobilization of intellect, industry, and fear. Yet Lawrence's role was not limited to machines. He was a bridge between theory and reality. While Oppenheimer calculated chain reactions in New Mexico, Lawrence built the infrastructure that made those ideas physically possible. He travelled constantly, meeting with Groves, advising the government, and solving engineering crises that threatened to slow the project. If a magnet failed, if a vacuum tube shorted, if a beam drifted off course, Lawrence demanded solutions fast. But as success drew closer, a shadow formed. Lawrence began to understand the true scale of what they were creating. The energy of the atom, once a scientific curiosity, was now being shaped into a weapon capable of erasing cities. He believed the Allies had no choice. The world was at war, and wars were not won with hesitation. Still, he carried the weight of the project heavily, though he rarely spoke of it. By mid-1945, uranium from Oak Ridge flowed to Los Alamos. The bomb design was finalized. The chain reaction calculations held. The decision was made. The first nuclear weapon would be tested in the New Mexico desert. Lawrence was not there for the Trinity test. He was recovering from illness, but he received the cable that confirmed the explosion. A blinding flash, a rising cloud, a new force in the world. It was the moment science crossed a threshold it could never return from. Question: after giving the world the tools to split the atom, could Ernest Lawrence still control the consequences of the discovery he helped bring to life? The war ended with two flashes of light: Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Cities erased in seconds by a force born from the same atoms Lawrence had once studied with curiosity and pride. When news of the bombings reached him, his reaction wasn't celebration. It was silence. Ernest Lawrence had believed the atomic project was necessary to end the war, but he could not ignore what the weapon had done. The scientific triumph was undeniable. The human cost was unbearable. In the months that followed, Lawrence tried to reconcile the two. He visited Washington, met with military leaders, and reviewed classified reports. He understood the argument. The bomb had forced Japan's surrender, spared an invasion, and ended the bloodiest conflict in human history. But he also knew that science had crossed a line. The atom was no longer a tool of knowledge. It had become a tool of power. Oppenheimer publicly expressed regret. He spoke of guilt, of the need for international control, of limiting nuclear weapons before they multiplied. Lawrence disagreed. He believed hesitation was dangerous. The Soviet Union was expanding. Tensions were rising. To him, the only way to prevent a future war was through overwhelming deterrence, not fewer weapons, but better ones. This growing divide became one of the most painful chapters in American science. Once close colleagues and friends, Lawrence and Oppenheimer now stood on opposite sides of the nuclear debate. Oppenheimer argued for diplomacy. Lawrence argued for security. Meetings grew cold. Letters went unanswered. And when Oppenheimer was later accused of disloyalty during the Red Scare investigations, Lawrence did not defend him. It was a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Lawrence continued to shape the future of nuclear research. He pushed for the development of even larger particle accelerators, machines capable of probing deeper into the nucleus and generating new knowledge, and, indirectly, new weapons. His radiation laboratory transformed into a national powerhouse, receiving enormous federal funding. Scientific discovery was no longer guided by curiosity alone. It was driven by geopolitics. But the success carried a physical toll. Lawrence worked relentlessly, flying between Washington, Berkeley, and newly formed research sites. He was constantly sick, headaches, fatigue, and heart problems. Still, he refused to slow down. He believed that the safety of the nation, and perhaps the world, depended on the momentum of American science. In 1952, he helped establish a new national laboratory in Livermore, California, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, dedicated to advanced nuclear weapons development. It was a direct response to fears of Soviet advancements. The Cold War was accelerating, and Lawrence stood at its scientific frontline. Yet privately, he felt the weight of what his work had unleashed. He rarely spoke about the bombings, but colleagues remembered small moments. Long pauses during conversations, sudden withdrawals into thought, questions he asked about whether the world was safer or simply armed in a new direction. He never stopped believing that progress was essential, but he began to wonder what progress really meant. By the mid-1950s, Lawrence's health was collapsing. He had spent decades under pressure, running laboratories, advising governments, building machines the size of buildings, and navigating the moral fallout of the atomic age. In August 1958, while travelling abroad, Ernest Lawrence died unexpectedly of complications during surgery. The news shocked the scientific world. The man who built the first cyclotron, the man whose machines unlocked the nucleus, the man whose work ended one war and ignited another, was gone. But his influence was everywhere, in physics, in medicine, in national policy, and in the uneasy balance of power that defined the second half of the 20th century. Question: after shaping both scientific progress and global conflict, what legacy would Ernest Lawrence truly leave behind? One of discovery or one of danger? When Ernest Lawrence died in 1958, the world did not fully understand what it had lost. Newspapers wrote about the Nobel Prize, the cyclotron, and his role in the Manhattan Project. But none of those headlines captured the truth. Lawrence had reshaped the very structure of science. Before him, physics was a discipline of small labs, chalkboards, and quiet discoveries. After him, it became an industrial force. A partnership between government, engineers, and entire laboratories capable of bending the atom itself. His cyclotron sparked a revolution. The machines grew from palm-sized prototypes into giants weighing hundreds of tons. They revealed isotopes, unlocked new elements, and gave birth to nuclear medicine. Today, every PET scan, every radiation therapy, every particle accelerator used in research or hospitals carries a fragment of Lawrence's original idea. His invention didn't just change physics, it changed life and death. The laboratories he built became monuments to the future. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, perched on the hills overlooking San Francisco Bay, continued to expand long after his passing. I tapped her, pioneering breakthroughs in chemistry, biology, energy, and cosmology. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, created during the Cold War, evolved into a global center for nuclear security, laser fusion, and high-energy physics. Two institutions bearing his name, shaping the world in ways he never lived to witness. Yet Lawrence's legacy is more complicated than any monument. His machines accelerated particles, but they also accelerated history. By making uranium separation possible, he helped build the first atomic weapons. By supporting continued nuclear development in the 1950s, he indirectly helped launch the arms race. Scientists still debate whether he was a hero of discovery or an engineer of destruction. The truth lies somewhere between the two extremes. Lawrence never sought war, but he believed deeply in national security. He saw science as a tool that could protect civilization, even if the tools were dangerous. His conflict with Oppenheimer remains one of the great moral divides in the story of modern science, the debate between control and capability, between caution and strength. Lawrence pushed for preparedness. Oppenheimer pushed for restraint. Their disagreement shaped American nuclear policy for decades, but beyond the politics, beyond the bombs, there was something more personal. Lawrence believed in possibility. He believed the universe could be understood, measured, and improved if people were brave enough to try. His colleagues remembered his optimism, his calm authority, and his relentless focus. Even when the stakes rose, even when the world changed around him, Lawrence kept building machines, laboratories, opportunities for the next generation. In the years after his death, young physicists who had once worked under him became leaders of their own fields. Many credited Lawrence not just for his ideas, but for his vision. A belief that science was not a solitary act, but a collective effort. One that needed engineers, technicians, machinists, and thinkers working side by side. He turned laboratories into communities, and communities into engines of discovery. Today, particle accelerators circle the globe, from the tunnels beneath Geneva to the ion beams used in hospitals. Every one of them carries a hint of that first spark in Berkeley, where a young physicist, in a cluttered basement, decided to chase the atom around a magnetic circle. Ernest Lawrence didn't live to see the digital age, the space age, or the biotechnology revolution. But the foundations of all three trace back to his work. He left behind a world both safer and more dangerous, more advanced yet more fragile. A world forever changed by the decision to look inside the atom, and by the man who believed it was worth the risk. Lawrence showed humanity that great discoveries come with great consequences, and that progress can illuminate the world just as easily as it can burn it. Final question. In the end, was Ernest Lawrence the man who unlocked the universe, or the man who taught us how easily it could be destroyed?